Mercedes through this 2025 season find themselves in an interesting predicament. On the one hand, with their W16, they have a car which is extremely competitive over one lap. Clearly evident for all to see with Kimi Antonelli's maiden pole position last time out in Miami for the sprint race, and back that up with an impressive display for the main race, qualifying in P3. But the flip side of this competitive machine in qualifying trim is that it is less so when it comes to race situations. The car is having difficulties keeping up and producing the same kind of competitiveness which they're seeing in qualifying in the race with regards to keeping up with the likes of both Red Bull but primarily McLaren. Now, to rectify this issue, Mercedes for this upcoming Imola Grand Prix this weekend are bringing a raft of upgrades. Now, these upgrades are the first set of upgrades in this triple header, where they will be bringing upgrades for all three events, culminating of course at Barcelona, the Spanish Grand Prix, when of course I expect and presume they will bring the biggest part of it, with of course there being a major technical change to the front wings for this season from that point onwards. Now, what exactly are Mercedes bringing for Imola, and what are these upgrades targeting? Well, quite evidently the target here is to improve the race pace situation, because as we've just briefly discussed, Mercedes have an issue in race trim where they are nowhere near as competitive as they are in qualifying, and this is all to do with one thing, and it is the way in which they heat the tyres up both in qualifying and the races. Now, on the one hand, it's very impressive the way in which they get temperature into the tyres to have a competitive car in qualifying, but this is having a detrimental effect on their race pace, because of course this is meaning they're overheating their tyres very early on in every single stint, and this was very much evident in Miami in the main race, where they finished up in fourth with George Russell, some near 40 seconds behind that of McLaren, lapping a second a lap slower than them. So for this Imola event, to try to improve upon, if not completely get rid of this deficit, Mercedes are bringing three specific upgrades. Those are a brand new floor, a diffuser and rear brake drum assembly, with the aim of the game for them of course improving upon how they manage their tyres throughout race stints and the overall race itself. Now, this newly updated floor which they'll be bringing to both cars for this event will have an indirect effect on the thermal behavior of the car, allowing the drivers to push without having to constantly manage this massive amount of degradation they've had previously. At least this is what the team's technicians that have designed this floor intend to happen with it. And there also could be slight changes and modifications to the rear air intakes as well. So quite a interesting and visual change which we'll be able to see, I would suspect, come Friday, if not late on Thursday afternoon. And just basically everything here is about better control in terms of the thermal management of the rear tyres, making sure they're not slipping, making sure they're not overheating the tyres as much. And if they can do that, as we've seen in the overall inherent performance of the car, they're very much on a par to that of McLaren at the majority of races that we go to. Now, when it comes to race pace and extracting that same performance, they're not able to, and that is where the Achilles heel comes from. So it is very much important that these triple headers of upgrades for this next 3 race weekends completely rectifies and or improves upon it to a degree of say 80%. If you can do that, then they're going to be in the ballpark to be able to challenge McLaren to these wins. And speaking of challenging McLaren on a consistent basis, there is a particular component which is very much well documented and publicized about that Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull are trying to replicate at some point this season. Now, coincidentally, Ferrari are actually going to be trialing their own version of this particular system on their SF25 this weekend. And I am, of course, talking about McLaren's highly impressive, what can we call it, rear brake cooling system that they have on the MCL 39, which is where they are getting such an advantage in a race situation over the competitors, because they can keep the internal tyres temps down to a level through which they want to have it at. And that is their biggest differentiator, I would say, probably between all of these big three teams, between Mercedes, Red Bull and McLaren. I would say they're very much dependent on tracks that we go to, even Steven, in terms of outright performance for the majority of them, with sometimes McLaren having a bit more of an advantage depending on the circuit layout. But still, with that being said, this one ingenious technical device that is on their brake system dramatically helps to improve and balance out their race pace, because they can stay at a much more consistent lap time than all the rest can, because they are keeping the tyres a lot cooler no matter how much they push them. So if Mercedes, and of course this goes for Ferrari and Red Bull, can completely understand what McLaren do and put something of a similar sort of ilk onto their brake system, this should close the gap overall in the race situations when it comes to keeping the tyres cool. And that should bridge the gap that we see at specific tracks and weekends where the tyres overheat over a race distance. That would bring all of the lap times closer together, and we probably would have a much more exciting race on our hands as a result. And that, everyone, is where I'm going to wrap this video up. Hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, do of course leave a like on this video. Subscribe if you're new here on F1 Unraveled and have enjoyed the content in this. And I will catch you all later on this week with some more Formula 1 content throughout the Imola Grand Prix weekend. Catch you all later.